Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. So many different things to get to today. We're going to be talking a little bit about campaign 2026. The Democrats think they've found their guy to take down Susan Collins. Graham Platner is his name, but Graham Platner's not your run-of-the-mill Democrat. But as we're learning, a lot of Democrats these days aren't run-of-the-mill Democrats, including Zohran Mamdani. Got some new polling out of New York City to take a look at, both in a four-way race and a two-man race, if it's him head-to-head against Andy Cuomo, as Curtis Sliwa called him a couple of weeks ago. And then an interesting poll on what matters most to Gen Z men and Gen Z women. The divide is pretty significant. About as significant as it was between who they picked for president of the United States. So a lot to get into there. Jim, what's got you most excited today?
There are two things I love, Greg. First is being told that this Democratic candidate that I've never heard of is going to knock off a Republican senator who has won every re-election bid, crushes all opponents, sits on a throne of skulls. And I also like giving young people advice. Not that they like taking it, not that they like hearing it, but I think you and I are going to have some thoughts to share on this one coming up later today.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So stay tuned for all of that. In the meantime, if you do need some help, try BetterHelp. And this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. And when things go wrong, who do you turn to in life? Usually it's a trusted friend or a family member, maybe a member of the clergy. Sometimes people just let it all out to their hairdresser or whatever. But there are people who are actually trained and skilled in helping you out with these things. And so check out BetterHelp, because they've got the therapists that can probably help you walk through these things a lot better than the person that cuts your hair.
BetterHelp is fully online, and you can pause your subscription whenever you need to and switch therapists anytime at no extra cost. With more than 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served more than 5 million people all around the world. And remember, you can join a session with therapists at the click of a button, which helps you fit therapy into your busy life.
So as the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Find the one with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/3ML. That's better, HELP.com/3ML. All right, Jim, on to our first martini. We have no good martinis today. These are all kind of either bad or crazy. I guess the Gen Z split is good if you're looking at the guys. But let's go over to Graham Platner. He is the Democratic Senate candidate in Maine. He is a Marine Corps veteran, did 4 tours overseas. He is an oyster farmer. He's as blue collar as they come, Jim. And the Democrats believe that as a result of that, he's going to relate to the normal folks. Well, we'll see if that's going to happen. He's got a couple of problems here. First of all, he joined the Bernie Sanders Fight the Oligarchy tour. In fact, he's quoted on stage as saying, "I grew up in rural Maine and I did 4 tours in the infantry. I'm not afraid to name the enemy. The enemy is the oligarchy." And I don't think he ever defined what he meant by that. But also over at Free Beacon, they say that Graham Platner defended terrorist groups in a post-9/11 newspaper op-ed, arguing, quote, "One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter," unquote, and lamenting that, quote, "Every terrorist is portrayed as evil." And so he wrote this op-ed for the Bangor Daily News. Now, we should point out that he was in high school at the time, and he's obviously served, and as far as we know, served honorably in the Marine Corps on at least four deployments. So maybe you need to cut him a little bit of slack there. But given his quick and enthusiastic affiliation with Bernie Sanders, I don't think we need to be fooled about whether this guy is a moderate or a far left Democrat.
Greg, this is not the first time we have seen Democrats in the media, and yes, many people are saying I'm repeating myself, have fallen in love early on with a fairly unknown Democratic or independent, wink, wink, challenger. I'm thinking of Dan Osborne back in the Nebraska Senate race last cycle. Okay, if you want to say it's unfair to judge someone too harshly over something they wrote in high school, fine. But when you pick somebody who's a political outsider who has no other past activities, then we can't review their voting record in the state legislature. We can't, review votes made on a town council or board of education or something. This is what we got to go on. Now, out of curiosity, Greg, when was that written in the Bangor Daily News?
November 25th, 2002.
2002. All right. In that era, there was another great contributor to the Bangor Daily News, a correspondent at States News Service. Me. I was writing back then. And covering Olympia Snow and Susan Collins, as I used to call them, the nice lady caucus, because they were both very nice ladies. And lo and behold, that's very popular in Maine. And almost as long as Susan Collins has been in the Senate, Maine Democrats have talked themselves into believing this is the year we take her down. She's so right wing. We're going to take, and almost every year she, not only wins re-election, she usually wins like a very wide margin. Last cycle, in a sign that something was really wrong with the polling, Sarah Gideon led every poll over Susan Collins, usually by a lot, by like 8 points. And then on election day, Collins won by 8 points. So, this interesting, Maine Republicans don't like to answer the phone. They don't like to tell, whatever factor was going on there. Susan Collins sits on a throne of skulls, as I like to joke. And because she's a nice lady, that's what makes it funny. She's not this, hardcore partisan bomb thrower, but she's very darn popular there. Is it fair to judge someone for, as a high schooler, writing something snotty and obnoxious and insisting that terrorists are not evil? Okay, but here's the thing, Greg, there was terrorism when you and I were in high school, right? This is we're around the same age. We're talking invasion of Panama. We're talking the first Persian Gulf War. Did you ever write, Saddam Hussein's a good guy?
Nope.
Did you ever write Manuel Noriega as a poor misunderstood soul who, Abu Abbas, no, there's no early, this guy, the embassy bombings, and Osama bin Laden. No, that's not something teenagers, trust me, I got some experience with, they'll do stuff that will drive you crazy. But bin Laden's got a point. It's usually not something you see somebody saying. So I could see, look, this is probably going to come up in attack ads. And Maine Democrats are going to say, "Oh, this is so unfair. He was a naive, useful guy." Okay, right? But when your whole theme is this nebulous oligarchy, it's like Temu brand populism. It's like all the hard edges have been sanded off, and there's no details there. This is what's going to fill the vacuum here. So, if this guy thinks he's getting a raw deal, then you got to go out and give a very detailed, this is the Graham Platner platform. This is what I want to do here, and let the people pick that apart. Because in the absence of that, people are going to talk about what you have done, which was apparently make the argument that terrorists are unfairly demonized. And no, I think they are very fairly demonized.
Yeah. And so in this Free Beacon report, it says that apparently he wasn't the only one who was part of this column or article or whatever it was, but they took issue with, quote, incomplete coverage, unquote, of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, quote, where a sometimes oppressive Israeli state can be and often is portrayed as a victim. Now, given Bernie Sanders leading the way on cutting off military aid to Israel, I think this becomes a pretty relevant issue pretty darn fast. And given where the Democratic Party is, I think Graham Platner would be probably straight out front there saying that absolutely he's not on the side of the Israelis. Much more to come in just a moment, but first let's talk about your health and taking care of that liver. The liver cleans up a lot of our mistakes, dietary and beverage-wise, right? So more than 30% of Americans have a sluggish liver as a result of that, a problem that often goes undetected until the very last minute. But Dose is on a mission to educate all of us on why it's so important to maintain your liver health, and it's created an incredible product to help you do just that. Dose for Your Liver was formulated to cleanse your liver of unwanted elements, aid digestion, and maintain your body's filter.
And we're talking about clinical results in a double-blind placebo-controlled clinical trial. Dose for Your Liver lowered liver enzyme levels by 50% in over 86% of participants.
Yeah, it also gives you more energy, better digestion, reduction in brain fog, better sleep, and it just tastes great. So what's not to love? Support your health with Dose Daily. Save 25% on your first month when you subscribe at dosedaily.co/3ml or enter the code 3ml at checkout. Please note the 25% discount applies only to subscription orders, not one-time purchases. Cancel anytime, no hassle. That's dosedaily.co/3ml to get 25% off your first monthly subscription with the code 3ML. All right, Jim, on to our second martini. This is definitely not good, but it's a little more intriguing than we might have thought. A new poll from the New York Times and Siena looking at the New York City mayor's race, shows Zohran Mamdani with a big lead in the race for mayor. 46% in favor of Mamdani, 24% plan to vote for Cuomo, 15% for Curtis Sliwa, 9% for Mayor Eric Adams, 5% say they are still undecided. Now, in the same poll, if it's a two-person race, it is not a two-person race, and it probably will never be a two-person race. But if it were, Mamdani's lead shrinks to 48 to 44 over Cuomo. But another poll from Touting Research last month found that Mamdani leads Cuomo 42 to 26, and if it were a two-man race, he would still lead by 11, 52 to 41. So getting a little more intriguing in the hypothetical that's never going to happen, Jim. But what do you make of the fact that Mamdani's got a massive lead in a four-way race and a little bit tighter if it were to go down to two men?
Yeah, I don't begrudge the New York Times asking these questions, but we're talking about something that is now astronomically unlikely. As you know, Friday, Eric Adams had this highly touted press conference, and I think you were entirely in your right mind to say, come on, he's not going to announce a Friday afternoon press conference to say I'm staying in the race. And that's exactly what Eric Adams did. The news announcement was that there was no news, that nothing was changing, and he was staying in there, which, like, okay, fine. You know, again, it doesn't seem like it's in his character. As we saw, and I hope listeners listen to our interview with Curtis Sliwa. Sliwa is not interested in a Trump administration job. The only thing he wants to do is be mayor, and I just don't see any scenario where he goes back on his word that dramatically and that emphatically and drops out. So it's probably going to be a four-way race, and the outlook is not good. And again, it's very hard to convince a New York Republican to say, oh, you have to convince your guy to drop out just so you can get the prize of Andrew Cuomo as mayor, that he's, this is not a good guy either. So frustrating. My colleague Rick Brookhiser has this really good corner post today, just walking through the history of New York City going back to the 70s. And the original decline in crime under Rudy Giuliani and Bratton, the police commissioner, and how it managed to be maintained pretty well through the Bloomberg years. Again, not endorsing everything these guys did, but just saying the state of the city was better, and how it started to decline under de Blasio and got considerably worse. Was the pandemic a factor? Sure. There are a bunch of factors that added to this, but there's nothing to indicate Mamdani is going to improve this. And what's more, he makes the point that Mamdani at 33, what you and I think of as Giuliani as being, I'm senile enough to think it was not that long ago. That the idea that, like, the decline of crime in New York City in the 1990s, Mamdani has no memory of this. This is all before his time. So as a result, he doesn't know what worked. He doesn't know what changes needed to be made. And he doesn't know that if you're a New Yorker of a certain age, you've lived through all this already. You don't need to re-experience it. So a very frustrating turn of events. The argument about who should drop out, I think, it's all kind of moot. But even if it did, it's not, if you're Cuomo, wouldn't it be great if everybody dropped out? I'm only down by 4. Again, you've already had a matchup against this guy and you fell short. I don't really see why you would expect things to be dramatically different in the general election.
Definitely seeing some people getting more scared about Mamdani, though, that they might be willing to hold their nose if that scenario did present itself, but that scenario is not presenting itself. When it comes to Mamdani, Jim, I think this was last week, I guess, Abby Phillips over at CNN interviewing Mamdani and talking about, hey, that Kansas City government-run grocery store? That was a total failure. Why do you think you'd be better? Listen to see if you can understand what Mamdani's trying to say here.
Another example in Kansas City where they had a government-run grocery store, and it's been there for years, but it's on the verge of closing because it doesn't work. They've been riddled with crime. They've dealt with just a lack of inventory. There are other examples where it just hasn't worked because, frankly, the government is not that good at being in the business of being in grocery stores. So what do you say to that example?
I say to that example, as well as the examples of our own failures as city government right here in New York City, that we have to prove not only the efficacy, but the excellence of this idea.
Jim, that's awfully close to real socialism hasn't been tried, but not quite getting the lingo yet.
That's the second favorite exchange on that topic. On Morning Joe last week, Bill de Blasio, who has endorsed Mamdani, said, government-run grocery stores work everywhere. And Joe Scarborough, to his credit, pushed back on that and said, where? Name one case where this has. And De Blasio, with a little bit of a deer in the headlights look, is like, I'll have to get back to you on that. And I think Joe Scarborough is entitled to take a victory lap, but be careful because otherwise they might groundhog you. De Blasio, just reach out, snap your neck like that. He's vicious. He's a vicious killer, everybody. Good for Abby Phillips for asking the question. I don't think that's a very convincing answer. It's like, we need to prove that this thing that keeps failing can work, which kind of is a good summary of socialism in a nutshell. And no, it's not going to work. This time it's going to be totally different because we're going to have better signs for the growth. I don't know. It just is. It's utterly fascinating that considering all the problems that New York City faces, this guy comes along with the idea of state-run grocery stores and looks like he's on his way to cruising to victory, which is infuriating. And it makes you wonder if everybody with common sense has already moved out of New York City. Yeah,
it's kind of scary. And, you often hear about politicians being in the pocket of somebody. Mamdani might actually be able to fit in the pocket of Bill de Blasio. So it's Bill de Blasio, big guy. Anyway, let's talk about OneSkin, because if you're a voter in New York, you're going through some stress right now. But, you need to protect your skin from the sun. But if you could protect it from things like collagen loss and inflammation, wouldn't you want to do that? And maybe even repair some of the damage you did when you were younger? Well, the good news is that you can. And that's something we've learned from our scientist friends over at OneSkin.
After testing the effectiveness of more than 900 so-called anti-aging peptides, the team at OneSkin developed the OS1 peptide, the first ingredient that reverses the skin's biological age by reducing the accumulation of senescent cells. We looked it up. Senescent means aging. OS1 works at the cellular level to improve those key aging biomarkers while reducing the visible signs of aging, including lines, wrinkles, and sagging skin.
Yeah, Mrs. Corumbus has said that she loves how light it is. It's not greasy. It absorbs into the skin very, very easily. Feels great. And so OneSkin is the world's first skin longevity company. By focusing on the cellular aspects of aging, OneSkin keeps your skin looking and acting younger for longer. For a limited time, you can try OneSkin with 15% off using the code 3ML at oneskin.co. That's 15% off at oneskin.co with the code 3ML. Now, after you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support the 3 Martini Lunch and tell them that we sent you. All right, Jim, on to our final martini here, and a new poll from NBC News Decision Desk of Gen Z. And they interviewed men who voted for Trump and women who voted for Harris. And they gave them 12 different items and said, tell me if this is important to a personal definition of success for you. Now, the men who voted for Trump, the number one thing that was a personal definition of success, having children, 34%, followed closely by financial independence, a fulfilling job and career, being married, having money to do things you want, owning your own home, being grounded spiritually, making family and community proud, having no debt, using your talent and resources to help others, being able to retire early, and coming in last, having emotional stability. And over with the women who voted for Harris, 51%, number one, fulfilling job and career. Then having money to do things you want, then having emotional stability, then using talents and resources to help others, financial independence, having no debt, owning your own home, making your family and community proud, being grounded spiritually, able to retire early, and then coming in dead last, tied at 6%, being married and having children. So thinking about the way this generation is eventually going to reproduce, Jim, it's going to be quite the chore to produce the next generation. But I think you can see the different priorities in linking how these people voted last year.
Greg, if what you want is by definition something you don't already have, then young male Trump voters want children, and young female Harris voters want emotional stability because they don't have emotional stability yet. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about my colleague Ramesh Ponnuru, my double colleague Ramesh Ponnuru, writes for both the Post and National Review, talked about the impending nuptials of Travis Kelce and some singer. The idea of this concept of a capstone marriage. They're both in their 30s, right? So yeah. They've both had very successful careers, and this philosophy at work that understandably, and look, Getting married is a giant commitment, right? There's nothing wrong with looking at that and saying, oh, it's kind of scary. I think if you're not scared, the fact that you're scared about something is a sign you recognize how consequential it is and you want to get this right. So there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But what Ramesh had written about was this kind of philosophy of people say, I don't want to get married until I have my career set. I don't want to get married until I'm, out of college, until I've finish maybe get a grad degree. They have all these things in life they want to do before they get married. And of course, most people intend to have kids after they get married. And the problem is that if you kind of feel like your career requires a graduate degree, if you kind of feel like that if your definition of when you're ready for marriage keeps getting pushed further out, maybe into late 20s and maybe into 30s, maybe into the early 30s. People wonder why our birth rate is going down. Well, if you delay it, you have fewer years in which you can get pregnant, you can have children. I'm thinking of My Cousin Vinny, where Miss Vito says, I got a biological clock that's ticking like this. Many people will tell you, getting pregnant after 30 is more challenging, and getting pregnant after 40 is just about difficult, and there are all kinds of attendant risks that go with that. So it makes sense for a lot of women to have this internal clock of, I should be married by 30 because I want to start having kids by 32, 33, 34, something in there. It's one of those things where it is probably not good to have young women who say, I'll do that later. I'll do that later in life. Speaking from experience, there's never going to be a perfect time in your life to feel like it's time to get married. There's never going to be a perfect time in your life to say, we want to start having children. There's always going to be some reason, if you're looking for it, to say, next year after I get that promotion, next year my life will be more set. No, your life will never be more set. This is as good as it's going to get. Speaking from experience, you meet that person in life who you want to spend the rest of your life with. I think when Harry Met Sally put it very well, you want the rest of your life to start as soon as possible. Don't be afraid to pull that trigger. And as for having children, Greg, I'm sure you'd agree with me, they are one of life's greatest blessings. And, they transform your life. Yes, they can exhaust you. Yes, they can sometimes drive you crazy. I told you to close the refrigerator door, that kind of stuff. But, in the end, it's so fulfilling. And I know some people who put this off and they're now at a stage of life where it's harder, or they may have missed that window. I feel really bad for people who miss out on that. So I've heard there are some people who are saying we want to do this earlier in life because we want to make sure we get this in and we don't feel this, face all these challenges for doing this, when you try to do this into your 30s and into your 40s. So I hope that the young women maybe reevaluate things. I hope that guys are able to be persuasive and say, hey, let's start this lovely journey together, and things turn out well. This is kind of an ominous one, but it also is indication, lest anyone think between this and our discussion of job interviews, this podcast is now two cranky middle-aged guys complaining about young people. Look, I get it. If you're Generation X, our adult lives have largely been 9/11, the Great Recession, and COVID, right? Like three, really big, significant challenge. Every generation faces significant challenges: Vietnam, World War II, Great Depression, Dust Bowl, etc. But if you're young, you've lived in an era of, decent amount of political instability, decent amount of economic ups and downs. COVID, I think, was probably as disruptive an event in American life as anything to come down the pike in a century or two. So, they've had some challenges. That doesn't mean you get to live in your parents' basement and sit on the couch forever. Go out there and start your life. You're going to enjoy it. It's going to be worthwhile. Go read Heavy Lifting.
Well, I laugh at your example there because we came home from church on Sunday and the freezer was wide open. So amazingly, not much had to be tossed, but it's
could have been anybody. Could have been anybody.
A very timely.
Two strong suspects on the younger side of the spectrum.
Yes. There's no official indictment that's been handed down yet from the grand jury, but time might tell on that. And as long as I'm talking about church, being grounded spiritually, I think, is a really important part of this too, because if you're on the same wavelength with that, a lot of the other things will come out of that and flow much better in terms of how you raise your kids, whether you want kids, just how your life goes. If you're in very different places there, you're going to clash in a lot of places you don't suspect, especially once you have kids. So if you have kids, because apparently all these Harris female voters don't want them. At least it's not very high priority for them. But there are women who did vote for Trump, for young men who voted for Trump. Not a huge percentage, but they do exist. So good luck finding them. Jim, on that note, we'll recess for today and reconvene tomorrow. See you then.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific Tuesday. Join us again Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.